what we're going to talk about is something called set and interval notation. So you have those graphics on your guided notes, but let's connect to what you have learned before and what we're learning today. So in Algebra 2, you would have these symbols that were like greater than, less than, or not equal. If you put that on a number line, so let's say it was like not equal to 7. What did you put at 7 so you didn't use that number? If you made like a number line. So here's your number line, here's 7. Let's just say I want to be greater than 7. How did you graph that on your number line? Perfect. Put an open circle and then shaded whichever way. Okay. So in your Algebra 2 and lower, you had these as an option. Okay. What we want to do is we're going to get some complex answers where you have multiple pieces, either less than this, greater than that, but not this. It's too hard to use these symbols. So we're going to convert this and we're going to use a parenthesis. So this would be like with those guided notes, this isn't exactly on there, right? They have the table with all this summarized. So what I would do is in the margin or right below that first one, the big gap, I would put this on there. And then we'll put it, I'll give you examples of like how to use it, but you probably have never done this before. Okay. Now, similarly, if you had a greater than or equal, less than or equal, or equal symbol, what went on your number line? Circle. Yeah, I know there's only 6 of you, but you're all gonna have to talk here. Okay, when we have a closed circle, we are gonna use a bracket to signify that, and I'll show you what I mean by this in the examples. I don't know how to spell parentheses either, so it's just So in your Algebra 2, for example, you had to do domain questions. So maybe your domain was like all real numbers, but like I can't use 7. And so a lot of teachers, and this is totally fine, but say you can write all real or put that little R and then except whatever, 7. When we get to this pre-calc level, what we need to start transitioning into is more formal notational math stuff. Because when you get to calc, if you go to stats, if you go to wherever branch you take your math class to, you have to not always use shortcuts or always use like the little cheat around that we sometimes have. You have to actually know why this works and what this looks like and have a better, it's called notational fluency as a math teacher. Okay, so that's why we're learning this. Plus your answers look way better when you get complex answers if you use this. Okay, so on here we have x is greater than 0. That is your inequality. We want to write it in what's called interval, or sometimes it's called set, because you're making these sets of numbers, notation. So the generic of how it looks is you're going to have a minimum number, and then comma, a maximum number. And then those two numbers are going to be surrounded by combinations of parentheses and brackets based on the symbols that were there. Okay, so my first one, x is greater than 0. By minimum, I mean like what is that minimum number that I can have? But be careful, because I can put a parenthesis or a bracket to include or not include it. So sometimes I get like, okay, what's my minimum number? And something like 1. And I get why you say 1, because you can't technically use 0, but I can use 0.9. I can use 0.1. I can use any decimal I want. So in that minimum spot, we put that 0, but then if we want to not include it, what symbol should go with it? So what symbol went with a greater than symbol? A parenthesis. So I'm going to put a parenthesis before it, and I'm going to face it, because you're making a set, so we want these things to like create this closed group of numbers. So that's why it faces that way. Okay, now if I want numbers greater than 0, what's the maximum number I can be? Infinity. So I put infinity here. Now, one thing that is always true, infinity is not a location. You can't land on infinity. You can't equal infinity, because you can always go to infinity plus 7 or infinity squared. You can always keep going. So all infinities have to have a parenthesis because, again, you cannot use infinity if it's not a location. It keeps going. So all versions of infinity always get a parenthesis. You're never going to have a bracket on one of those. Okay, let's try another one. So x is less than or equal to 5. So I'm going to kind of set up that structure, minimum, comma, max. Sometimes it's easier to go, what's the min, what's the max? Sometimes it's easier to just put the number where it belongs. So if I want x less than or equal to 5, is 5 the min or the max? It's the max. And now to close this set, do I use a parenthesis or a bracket? Bracket. Now here's your cheat. So you do have sometimes when you can't use notes on stuff, you have this straight part. Think of that as like the bottom of your bracket. And so wherever you've got that equals, that's going to be a bracket. Versus your greater than doesn't have that straight part under it. So that's your parenthesis. Okay. Now what would be my minimum if I have to be less than 5? Yep, negative infinity. And then should I do a bracket or parenthesis on that one? So now, between, like in these two basic examples, these are the same easiness to write, I would say. It's as we get going that you're going to have these complex answers, and then the interval or set notation is actually easier to understand. Okay? All right, you guys try this one. So write me the interval for that. Now, because I have two numbers, I'm not going to have an infinity in this one. Because I've got number min and max. So I've got negative 10 as my min, 11 is my max. What symbol should go with the 10? Negative 10. Bracket. And then 11 is your parentheses. Okay. All right, this one. All right, let's try this one. X is not equal to 3. So this throws a little different curveball at you. Because you want everything except 3. So one strategy, if you're struggling with these, is to draw your number line and see what the number line looks like. So for this one, if I would have drawn it, negative 10, 11, this would have been closed, this would have been open. And when I shade, you can see it's in between. And so this mirrors right to that interval location. So let's do the same thing for not 3. So here's 3. I want not that. Well, if I'm not that, I would shade both ways. Okay, so like in this one, I had one piece shaded. In this one, I have two distinct pieces shaded. So I'm actually going to have two intervals of numbers that one goes with each the right and the left arrow across there. Okay, so if we take this arrow first, okay, what's the minimum for that segment of line? How far does it go? Forever, so negative infinity. Okay, and then as I travel up my number line, I'm like, oh, I hit 3. I don't want to use 3, so I have so 3 is like the max of that shaded part, and then I have to put parentheses on there because I don't want that one. Now the next, so technically you are supposed to have a U here. What that U stands for is in union with. In pre-calc, we're building your notational fluency. That is one that if you don't have the U, I'm not going to be like, that's totally wrong, and we're going to be wrong. But you're going to need it as you progress in your math curriculum. So I would just get used to putting it there right now. So if you have multiple parts to your answer, you put a U in between them all, showing that this union of all these pieces, that is actually my answer, not just this piece and that one. They're all one. Okay, so now I look at my second piece here, and I go, okay, so basically this is gone. What's my minimum of the second piece? Where does it start? End of. Starts at 3. But I don't want to include 3, so I do parenthesis 3, and then it keeps going. So infinity. Now I would say writing not equals is easier, but if I'm saying what is the domain, you can't say the domain is not 3. You have to say the domain is negative infinity to 3 and 3 to infinity. That's what your domain is. You can't speak in terms of what's not. Okay? All right, give that one a try. You need to draw yourself a picture first. Go ahead and do that. So by drawing the picture, the advantage to this is when I look at it, I look at how many pieces or intervals of numbers are there. Well, I would have 1, 2, and I would have 3 pieces. So this answer has 3 parts. And then I just go to each piece and I'm like, all right, what's listed, what's there? So my first piece would be that negative infinity to negative 8 with the brackets. Or, I'm sorry, with the parentheses, not the brackets. The piece that tons of people miss is the between here. So the most common answer I get is negative infinity to negative 8, and then a union with, and they just go 3 to infinity. But there is a piece in the middle here that you can use. You can use 0, you can use 4, you just can't use negative 8 and 3, so you have to do another one for that middle gap between those 2 open circles. All right, based on that, what questions do you guys have? Clarify. You're going to be using this all year. I know, like the P1 assignment that you'll eventually get, as you like do both, just so you get used to going back and forth. But 95% of your answers are going to be in interval notation, is what it's called. Like on tests, it's going to say what's your answer in interval notation. So you might solve an inequality, but then put your answer in interval notation for us.